Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's now 12:30 East Africa time, the scheduled time for the webinar to begin, and we will be starting right now. I can see that a few more people are joining, and I hope they will join during the course of this webinar. Just very briefly on this webinar itself. My name is Danush Dinesh, and I work as the Global Policy Engagement Manager for CCAFS. I will be chairing this session, and this webinar is basically focused on the range of resources and tools which CCAFS has produced and its relevance in usability for the private sector. And in this presentation, we have two senior researchers from CCAFS. We have Dr. James Kinyangi, who is the regional program leader for CCAFS in East Africa, who will be speaking about CCAFS activities in East Africa. And we also have Dr. Sonia Vermeulen, who is the head of research for CCAFS. Globally, Sonia will be talking about the work that CCAFS has engaged in synthesis and global policy engagement, including with the private sector. We also have representative from the private sector, Mr. Suresh Patel, who is the chair of the Sector Board of Environment, Water and Natural Resources at the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Mr. Patel has been a prominent voice of the private sector in Kenya and in East Africa, and will bring in the private sector perspective on how science-based tools and resources are relevant in private sector activities. So without much further delay, I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. James Kinyangi, who will start the presentation. James, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Dinesh. First slide, please. Welcome to those of you who are joining us today in this webinar. We're pleased to take this opportunity to share with you some of the products that CCAFS, which is the CGIAR program on climate change, agriculture, and food security, has to offer of a wide range of partnerships in East Africa. I will be joined for this presentation with my colleague Sonia Vermeulen. And let me also acknowledge at this point that we've had inputs from Dr. Marian Radeni, who is also the Science CCAFS officer based here in East Africa, and Danush, who has ably accepted to chair this webinar. Next slide, please. Let me start by highlighting the 4 areas that we will address in this webinar. First, we will ask a few questions as to what does CCAFS do globally and in the region, transcending its work across scales and across disciplines. The second area we will address is what are some of the outputs and results that CCAFS has to offer. The third area is going to focus on tools. And lastly, we're also going to present and highlight some of the partnerships that CCAFS works across and present 1 or 2 case studies in order for you to understand the relationships between different partnerships. Next slide. Let me start by introducing CCAFS. As I mentioned, CCAFS is the CGIAR program on climate change, agriculture, and food security. It's a global research partnership on smallholder agriculture and climate change. It brings together the participation of the Future Earth, and the program is led by CIAT, bringing together researchers in agricultural science, development science, climate science, earth system science, with a focus to identify and address important interactions across climate change, agriculture, and food security. Work across different thematic areas, including long-term adaptation, including linking knowledge with action, gender equity, climate risk management, low emissions agriculture. But let me highlight 3 of the key areas that we will discuss today. One being under long-term adaptation, which brings together the whole aspect of examining climate and impact models, looking at future farming regions, and how climate and changing climate will impact and result in new farming system opportunities, and also how public policy is beginning to deal with some of these aspects. The second area, which will be highlighted in some of the slides that you'll see today, is on seasonal forecasts, creating that diversity that we need in early warning systems, weather insurance, and also approaches to making sure that we're able to manage variability under changing climate. And lastly, we'll look at some of the approaches that are being undertaken by CCAFS and its partners with respect to low carbon development. And I know for the private sector this is very interesting because these are some of this is the particular area of carbon emissions reductions where many of you will be interested to work with some of the business models that are emerging. Next slide, please. Let me also say that as the regional piece of the global program, we present a whole context here in East Africa representing different farming systems, different livelihood contexts across the 4 focus countries where we work in East Africa. That is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And let me add that for a lot of our work that is emerging and a lot of the tools that we will share today, we have specific areas in which we're doing some of this research and specific partners and specific thematic areas. But let me say that a lot of this has broad application across the region and indeed across Africa, given that a lot of the contexts that we are talking about in Eastern Africa are very similar to some of the contexts that exist in Southern Africa and other regions of Africa. So with those few introductions, ladies and gentlemen, I will invite my colleague Sonia Vermeulen to take you through the next set of slides.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much. Could I ask my colleagues, please, to switch off their microphones? Thank you. Good morning, listeners and viewers. My task today will be to take you through some of the outputs and some of the tools that we have available from CCAFS. Because we only have a few minutes, I'm going to be giving you a very rapid overview. So please understand that what I'm going to be describing in the next few minutes are just some examples, and we have many, many more resources available for your use. So we'd like to recommend that the best way to get hold of what we're producing through our research, through our partnerships, can be found on our website. You can see the address there, www.ccafs.cgir.org. And for all of you who've attended today or have registered today, you can take away these slides with you at the end for your own reference. So by going into the website, you can get quick and easy access to everything we have, and we update this website on a daily basis. The slide that you see in front of you at the moment is our publication page, and it shows you the wide range of products we put out. As a science organization, of course, we put out very detailed, peer-reviewed studies which appear as journal articles and as working papers, but we also make a lot of effort to put all of these results and findings into much more usable formats for non-specialist readers, and these might include our info notes, which may discuss particular approaches or technologies, or our policy briefs, and other kind of material of this sort, much more readable stuff. Next slide, please. For example, one very easy way, if you have a particular interest in mind, is to actually use our blog stories as an entry point. These are written by partners in East Africa and also in many other regions across the world. And because they're searchable, it means that you can quickly track down your own area of interest. To give you an example, say you were interested in potatoes and your particular interest was Uganda, you could very quickly search for that, and you would find there examples of what kind of research is going on, who's involved, which partners are there, where there's research work on the ground, and you could also get contacts, people that you could actually get in touch with to find out more or to take it further. So we recommend the blog stories as a very easy entry point to our work. You will also find on our website that we do have a particular region page, and including a regional page for East Africa. Next slide, please. So by going into the region page, or simply by looking at our list of publications, you can find some relevant recent publications, such as the one that we show here. So this one, Climate Change, Adaptation and Mitigation Initiatives for Agriculture in East Africa. It looks at the current policies around adaptation and mitigation in agriculture for 4 countries, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda. So if you want to update yourself on what's the current policy and regulatory environment, what are the opportunities and programs in each of these 4 countries, this is the ideal publication for you. At this point, I'd like to add that all of our material is completely for free. We are a non-profit organization, and we are committed to putting out global public goods for everybody to use. So anything that you see on our website or that I'm discussing right now, it's there for free. You can just take it and distribute it, obviously citing where it comes from originally. Next slide, please. We also, of course, have these kinds of products at a global level. For example, earlier this year, the major 5th assessment report for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out. Within that, you would have found 100 pages or so analyzing what's going to be happening to crop production, livestock production, and farming systems in the future. What we've done, for instance, in this info note that you see here, is to take those main findings and digest it into a much smaller piece, which is just 8 pages long, looks at the particular issues for developing countries, and provides some infographics to make it clear. Next slide, please. So as well as these kinds of research products, results, outputs and reports, we also offer a range of tools which users can download and make use of in any way that you choose. So again, I'm just going to give you a few examples of that. You can access many more by looking at the tools portal on our website. Next slide, please. So one of interest to many companies is our Ag Trials database. It contains sets of agricultural trial data going back over the last 3 or 4 decades. We've invited everyone to put their trial data here. Many private companies have responded and added extensive material to the site, as well as national research centres and CGIAR centres. So it's a huge bank of information. All of the crop trials are linked to the weather information that was recorded during the time that those crops were grown, making it a very useful resource for analysing the impacts of climate on crop yields. Just to mention, there is also livestock data in there. It's not only about crops, but obviously the bulk of the information is around some of the key crops that we grow, including maize, sorghum, cassava and soy. Next slide, please. We also have these kinds of future diagnostic tools. We have the Food Security Case Maps, which is an interactive website in which you can look at the possible futures of crop yields, food security, malnutrition, and these types of issues in very specific countries going into the future. So the map that you see in front of you now is looking at future maize production across Eastern Africa. you can go in and use this tool to look at the ways that different models are projecting our food futures around the world under climate change. Next slide, please. Another area where CCAFS is active is actually looking at the climate data themselves. We recognize that what the big climate models do is that they give a very coarse spatial resolution. The grid cells that you can normally recognize are somewhere between 100 and 300 kilometers. For most agricultural purposes, that's just too big. So we put a lot of work into different downscaling methods to get data sets on climate, which are, these are about future climate, but which are at much more local levels. There are a few different techniques for doing this, which all have their advantages and disadvantages: statistical methods, dynamic methods, pattern-based methods. On the site, you can find all of those. You can find the methods themselves, and you can also find data sets that we've generated for anywhere in the world. You can just go in down to particular longitudes and latitudes and get particular future data sets. These are projections, of course, of what future climatic patterns are likely to be like. Many of our users have found this very useful in their own work at projecting, for putting this into agricultural crop growth models and other end uses such as that. Okay, next slide, please. The last thing I'd like to mention is our Big Facts website. This is a substantial portion of our website where what we've done is try to amass some very visual and specific data sets, well, not so much data sets, facts and messages around climate change, food security. So you can find all kinds of different images to download there and particular facts which are about specific regions or about specific issues. So here's an example from Africa where we're looking at potential futures for beans and cassava across the continent. We were actually just commenting before the webinar started that in the case of cassava, it's very interesting, as you'll see from that map on your right, that in fact increases in production are expected in several parts of Africa. The value of the Big Fact site is not only that you can have very simple and visual information, but also that in every case we put in there the scientific source. So it means you can go back to the root data if you want, or even get in touch with the scientists who created it to follow up. Next slide, please. So on that note, I'd like to say to you that with the Big Facts website, again, all of this material is there for your use. We actively welcome people to download the different graphs, etc., and to use them in their own presentations and work, citing it appropriately. And on that note, I'm now going to pass back to James and to give James the opportunity to share some examples, some more concrete examples of how we work actively on projects and initiatives with private sector partners. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Sonia. Next slide, please. So let me take the next 2 slides or so to share with the listeners some of the examples of how CCAFS research has been put into use by the private sector in East Africa in order to generate tangible benefits. The International Livestock Research Institute and the World Agroforestry Center, which many of you will know as the International Center for Research in Agroforestry, have been partnering with HEFA International to implement the East Africa Dairy Development Program. As many of you will know in the private sector, that livestock is one of the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for about 12% of the overall GHG budget. Now, HEFA and ICRAF and ILRI and other partners are working together to create a very robust dairy industry for East Africa, reaching almost 200,000 farmers at the moment through various different innovations in markets, financing models, processing, packaging, and supplies. And so this is one clear case and example of where there are business opportunities arising from the work of the research of ILRI, ICRAF, and also HEFA International and many other partners. And if you require more information about this partnership, we will be very willing to share with you. Next slide, please. Another very concrete example of how our research and the research of CCAFS has translated into investment programs is with the International Livestock Research Institute, working with Cornell University and a number of insurance companies in East Africa, starting the initial piloting work in Kenya and more recently extending that to southern Ethiopia. Looking to develop and extend the index-based livestock insurance scheme, through which the research supports the tracking of local forage conditions using satellite technology, and also helps to calculate average expected livestock loss, which then translates into information that the companies use to determine the indemnity payments for the policyholders. And so this is an exciting new program. It's ongoing, it's expanding, and this is one clear and concrete example where some of these partnerships that are developing under CCAFS and the private sector can be expanded. Next slide, please. And so, with those two examples, I want to wind up by saying that you are very welcome to keep in touch with us. We have an active Twitter account, CGIR Climate East Africa. We have a very active, with the support of Vivian Attakos and our communications group, and also the CCAFS Global Communications Group. We have a very active Facebook account. Those of you who prefer to use the RSS feeds, you can get in touch with us. You can also subscribe to our mailing list. And lastly, you can also send us email. Our email addresses are there. Myself, j.kinyangi@ctir.org, and also my colleague, Marin Redin. So I would like to say that we're very excited taking this forward, and may I yield this opportunity to Dinesh.
Thank you, James and Sonia, for this very excellent presentation. I found it really informative, and also some of the figures from the big facts, for instance, they were really compelling, and the work with herders in livestock insurance is also very interesting, and I think it's on the really on the cutting edge to enable smallholder farmers to increase their resilience to climate change. Now we will go on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Suresh Patel, who would speak a little bit more about, we've heard about the tools, the resources, and how the private sector is using these tools and resources and others from the scientific community, and what the needs are for the private sector in Kenya and the rest of East Africa. So I hand over to Mr. Suresh Patel now.
Thank you very much, participants. My name is Suresh Patel, as I said earlier. I'm from the private sector. I'm quite impressed with what CCAFS has presented right now, and I'm sure that private sector will take this opportunity not only in Kenya but across the world in order to utilize this information for it, as a businessman would say, that improve their bottom line. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I represent Kenya Private Sector Alliance. It's basically a limited liability membership organization registered in 2003 as a PAX body of the private sector in Kenya, it means that almost all associations of business membership organizations are actually members of private sector alliance under CAFS. So it's really in a PAX body in Kenya. Its mandate is to actually develop development through the advocacy projects and partnership with both local and international players. And this the CAFS works around by influencing the public policy through the policy formulation and implementation. I'll give an example later on. But directly and indirectly, there are 100,000 members under CAFS, which are basically represented through business membership organization and the private sector alliance. Next slide. Generally, felt that private sector is not quite active in issues of climate change. But in Kenya recently, private sector and the CAFS has been quite active in understanding the impacts of climate change and issues about the management. And this was very much seen recently when private sector actually participated in the process of developing the national climate change policy and legislation, where they actively give the direction to the government and the other partners to incorporate the views of the private sector. The law is going to be sworn out in a couple of months. But this engagement of the private sector in participation in climate change matter actually gave a good insight about the impact and seriousness of the onset of the climate change, and set the path for the thinking in that direction. And in fact, during this engagement is where the CCAFS came in close contact with the private sector, and of course my friend James was very proactive in including the private sector in looking into these matters of climate change. Next. Well, now there is a noticeable understanding in the private sector that it will need to look into its future resilience to the impacts of climate change with respect to its performance, and in addition to work on the reduced greenhouse gas footprints. The role of private sector cannot be now underestimated in climate smart agriculture in order to ensure that food security while going on to the usual business in food production, processing and marketing, but definitely embracing the green economy. Now actually the private sector is definitely compelled to look into the development and application of the new process technology, including a co-efficient product development and climate responsible investment. And when I say climate responsible investment means surely an investment which need to take care of the impact of the climate change across the board of the development. The private sector now has to make a right decision on the sustainability, because it is already felt that climate change has impact on their sustainability. And next slide. Well, in all practicality, the private sector operates on evidence-based decision-making. Even if they have to have improved the sustainability, that is, those decisions has to be on evidence-based approach. And this ability for the private sector is based on the information, knowledge, and experience. So for managing the climate change, private sector will look to science-based tools to make appropriate decisions. Science that is focused on evidence and reliability. In agriculture, this decision will be geared toward all the three emphases of climate smart agriculture: resilience, mitigation of GHG, and food security with improved productivity. It means that now the products that we need to look at clearly, every operation of them has to ensure that the survival is well defined. Next slide. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, now it has been, yeah, that's fine. The tools which private sector look on to based on science, some of them which I'm going to talk about is that one which we found very interesting was remote sensing based agriculture tool for the agriculture crop. That would mean that it will try to use the high resolution imagery as a way of identifying the crop variability, and this will actually help make decision on various aspects of agronomy, including soil sampling and other variables, which would finally help to reduce the crop loss. Another is a pasture biomass sensor. This kind of technology will probably help find out or map the pasture production, defining the feed availability for the livestock. But further, with the modification, such a tool can be also used in tree plantation to determine the crop area for harvesting by estimating the growth of the fresh shoot. Fresh shoot is a product of the tea production. Next slide. Another tool which we feel is important is the soil carbon inventory tool. This will help in the management and decision making for carbon sink, carbon emissions and potential sink. Also, soil carbon is important for the agriculture as a health and production benefit in the agricultural system. So the assessment of this particular soil carbon will be useful in private sector. In Kenya, some tools are being used right now. For example, in flower farms, are using the sensor to control the microclimate in greenhouses to promote the growth of roses with most optimized use of water. It also helps them make another decision on agronomy. A vegetable and food processing company which cans the white beans has developed drought-tolerant variety and is giving to farmer an indication that they already seen the problem in climate change and they're working in the direction. And this was done in partnership with the Research Institute in Kenya to the biotechnology modeling. The company is also developing now drought-tolerant tomato variety. Next slide. Another technology which we look as a tool is a biomass gasification. Although there are quite a number of plants in Kenya in industrial sector, but such technology of gasification can be used in agriculture sector to provide heat and power. And science-based tools can predict the availability and quantum of the biomass as a fuel for such plant, which will be definitely income stream for the farmers. Wastewater recycling for coffee processing plant has significant opportunity to reuse the treated water, both for processing and irrigation for same farm. Appropriate tools can manage such plant remotely to predict the quality of treated water for reuse. That will be again will be bringing down the cost of production, both for the processing plant and ultimately better revenue for the farmers. Next slide. So there are also some more area where private sector would like to see the tools and technology developed in agriculture production, as well as the value addition for the agriculture produce. And these are some of them, namely sustainable agriculture, water conservation and harvesting, agroforestry, climate compliant new crop. This, I mean that as climate change sets in, some of the crop will not grow. We need to bring different new crops, and we are really working in this direction in Kenya for the private sector's initiative. But we need those kind of tools which will allow us to ensure that this crop can grow in this country. Soil and nutrition, nutrient management, and pest and disease control. These are sectors we still are looking for appropriate tools. Next slide. Harvesting and processing and supply chain, surely this is a very important area, and I think it should be a priority at this moment. I saw some of the tools by CCAFS which could be applied in this direction, but surely much more can be done. Resource efficiency management, where the input and waste management again are important to get a better productivity. Improved access to information and technology, awareness creation, the product acceptability particularly. What I mean here is that as we go into the new products, new type of crops, obviously we need to make sure that the farmers and the other stakeholders are aware about it, that this is the way to go. Then financial management tools are important because we want farmers not only to just remain farmers, but to become a business person, for him to apply his income and expenditure items in a very prudent manner. And then finally, the genetic resource management is what we are looking at. I think there's a lot of opportunity for private sector to acquire these kind of tools from the research, science-based findings, and I'm pretty sure that CCAFS will move in this direction and help private sector to create those awareness. Next slide. So finally, I would say that East Africa is a leading African agriculture economy. It has some of the very important export crops, and it needs all necessary help, and particularly the private sector in agribusiness, to combat the climate change, for not reversing the gain acquired so far, and to meet the future national development targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh, for your presentation, and I do apologize for the technical issues which we're having, but you very bravely still managed to complete your presentation and on time. I really appreciate that. And now we have some time to take questions from the audience. And just to sort of describe how we go about this, those who are attending, you will have an option to raise your hand. So I would request you to just click on that option and raise your hand, and then I will give you the select and give you the opportunity to pose questions to panelists. While doing this, I request you to first introduce yourself and the organization you're representing, and if possible, direct your question at any one of our panelists. So it's now over to the audience. Let me see if I have any questions at the moment. Okay, there are two questions which have come up. Just one second. So first question we'll take is from Naiber Baba Tierto.
Yes.
Yes, Naiber Baba Theatre, please.
Just hold on. There's some noise coming from. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Please go on.
Yes.
You can.
My name is Baba Nebe Tierto. I work for World Vision International in the East Africa region as a Food Security and Climate Change Director. It's really pleasing to be invited to participate in this webinar. And the presentation from Sonia nearly knocked me off my chair because I did not know we had such wealth of information out there that we would need for our work here. So my question is just very simple, and probably the answer is very obvious, that are we going to get copies of the slides that were delivered by Sonia? Because we saw a lot of, what do you call it, web pages that we would use to download most of the facilities and resources for our team players out there in the field. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Baba. I'll just collect a few different questions and I think then we can answer them collectively. The next question is from Glenn Tyler.
Probably haven't heard him when he said very thank you. It's Glenn Tyler. I am an agriculture campaigner working to... Oh, hi, I'm not sure if you can hear me. My name is Glenn Tyler. I work for Greenpeace Africa. I'm an agriculture campaigner and we're promoting ecological farming in East Africa. My question is, I'd like to hear from all the speakers, but perhaps one of the CCAFS speakers and Suresh could answer. I'd like to know what the speakers understand by climate smart agriculture, whether there's a common definition they use, and particularly around the method of production, not necessarily the impacts of the production. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Glenn. There are a few more raised hands, so I'll take two more questions just now, and we can then answer that. Next one is from Mainsa Mgoya. Yes, Mainsa.
Yeah, hello, this is Mainsa.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I can be heard well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I joined a bit late, unfortunately, so I only managed to capture the last 5 or 6 slides from Suresh's presentation, so I didn't have any information on what James and Sonia presented. But nevertheless, my question would be to Suresh, what specific technologies and what specific sectors do you think could be much ready to be made? Because we have a basket of technologies and tools with CCAFS, we have private sector ready to take them up. What are some quick matches that you think can go in? This technology to this sector, this tool to this sector. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mainsa. And just one last question for just now, and if we have time, we'll come back for more questions. So it's Robert Nabanyumia. Please,
Thank
Robert.
you very much. I don't know whether you hear me or not. Thank you so much. I am called Robert Nabanyumia. I work for the UNDP GF project here in Uganda, in UNDP. And part of the work we are doing is really supporting conservation agriculture in areas that are semi-arid. Now, my question is simple and specific is, are there possibilities for cross-sharing information with the CCAFS so that we can compare the yields and information which are current efforts so that we improve our data qualities, and then in that way sort of give a general direction and recommendation on how our population should go in terms of implementing and scaling up conservation agriculture efforts? Is that a possibility? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. So we have taken 4 questions now, and we will ask our speakers to answer them, and once they've answered this, we'll probably see if we have time for other questions. So those who have questions, please hold on to them. So the first question was, I'll just say who has to answer which one, and then you can speak one after the other. So the first question was from the World Vision International about copies of slides being available. It will be available, but Sonia, maybe you can talk about other aspects like the newsletters or something through which they can access more information. Then the second question was from Greenpeace, and that was with regard to climate smart agriculture, what the definition of climate smart agriculture is and what the methods of production is. And I would request Sonia to take the lead on that, answering that question, and maybe James, you might also want to add to that in reference to East Africa, how climate smart agriculture is relevant and what methods of production. The third question from Mindset was to Suresh, and he basically asked about what specific technologies are applicable to which sectors. So if you could just mention some of the key agricultural sectors in Kenya and if there are any specific technology needs that they have. Another thing that he asked was, what are the common mistakes and how can these be avoided using these tools and resources? So perhaps you might want to touch on that, Suresh, and maybe James also, if you have some points on that, that'll be good to share. Finally, from our colleague from UNDP, Robert, who talked about cross-sharing information and improving data quality. James, it would be good if you can lead on that, particularly in context of that region, and Sonia could also add to that if you have some points. So I will first hand over to Sonia to answer the large list of questions that she has.
Thank you, Dhanush, and thanks very much for the questions. Turning first to World Vision, what I'd like to say first is that one of the most important ways that we work as a research organization is in partnership with major development organizations such as yourselves. We're very pleased to have World Vision on the call today. And you will also see that our work, when we work with private sector, often involves a large-scale development NGO as well. So, for example, James was talking about the East African dairy development work, in which we're working closely with Heifer International. Now, I know that World Vision has a huge reach on the ground. For example, you reach 1.7 million households in Tanzania and trying to build their resilience to climate change, and that's why you're really important partners for us. So I'd like to assure you that, of course, the slides will be available. There are also other ways to connect up to all of the CCAFS information. Please register on our website to receive newsletters or anything else you wish. And thirdly, at the end of this call, we will also be asking participants to give us a couple of minutes of feedback, and that's yet another way to connect, particularly if you've got anything specific. So thanks very much to World Vision and to all of the listeners. There are multiple ways to connect, and we very strongly value these partnerships. Secondly, moving on to the Greenpeace question, we all know that climate smart agriculture is a buzzword this year. On the 23rd of September, we're expecting Ban Ki-moon to be launching a global alliance on climate smart agriculture. And what exactly is this? And World Vision asked for a definition. So as defined by FAO, it's agriculture that balances food security against both resilience building and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So what does that mean in practice? Well, in practice it means that for any specific situation, you try to be as articulate and clear as possible about how you're including all three elements of building up productivity, adapting to future new climates and new risks, and also, where appropriate, mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. So the exact balance amongst those three components differs very much from situation to situation. The emphasis, as you would expect in East Africa, is much more around resilience building, for example, than around mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in smallholder contexts. But that balance changes from place to place, and really the important thing about being climate smart is to put everything into the package. It's about trying to avoid one-dimensional agriculture where all you do is, say, try to maximize your productivity without thinking about water management or biodiversity management or how climate risks are changing. It's really an emphasis on holistic thinking in our farming. So I hope that helps. I also really hope that Greenpeace tries to influence and become a part of this movement. There's several major NGOs who've clubbed together in Africa to make climate smart agriculture a reality and to make sure that it's serving the needs of smallholders and not working against them. So let's take that forward. Okay, I'll stop there and pass over to my co-speakers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sonia. That was very helpful. I would request Suresh if he could answer the questions which were directed at him, which was again related to the specific sectors in East Africa and what technologies might be useful to them, and also what are the common mistakes and how those can be avoided. Suresh, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. What I will say that the sector of factor, if you're talking about because of climate change, they're across the board. You see, but the major one which has impact on private sector are the area of maize, tea, and horticulture. As I mentioned, that these are the sector which provides the raw material for the value addition to the private sector, and the particular sector which we see getting hurt now more is maize and horticulture, where the produces are affected in terms of both productivity, disease, and market linkages. So I would say that it is very difficult to pinpoint each and every sector at this moment, but surely CCAFS has got the database which they can explain which sector has actually been severely affected. But in terms of the technology which probably we would like as a private sector to look into that, whatever produce is now available for us to produce, we need a technology, a serious technology transfer in terms of add the value. Currently that is happening, but when the quantum of the product is available, the technologies are not adequate. The other things is the seeds. I think the seeds is a very important part of for the agriculture, and I presume that right now the local research institutes are working around the seeds, which, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation about the beans and tomatoes and many other crops, including bananas, is being now looked into. But those are the key constraints which private sector should facing at the moment. In terms of the the mistake which private sector should avoid in adopting climate smart agriculture, largely that Kenya is particularly developing economy, and it will have to embrace various approaches to adopt to climate smart agriculture. We cannot go 100% linear, but we cannot go 100% green immediately in a very short term. So we have to have a balancing act there in order to make sure that we adopt the climate smart agriculture. But I don't see at this moment key mistake we are making at the moment, because the particular concept of the climate smart agriculture is just sinking in. We have to practice those things right now in order to derive our mistakes. But one thing which I would say that private sector will not go an NGO approach where probably we'll reach the farmers and provide them inputs free of charge or something like that. But our approach will be largely to provide them market linkage so that they can make sure that the entire produce is absorbed in the market. Probably we'll make sure that we don't make a mistake of giving them false information and promises to take up those producers. And it's already being worked out very systematically right now in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh, for that answer. I think that was a particularly difficult question, and that to answer in a few minutes' time, it would take quite a lot of effort. And also, I think it's quite interesting for CCAFS to also know that there is this knowledge needs at the sectoral level, and which we are already trying to address. So on the 18th of September, we're focusing on the rice sector and what technologies are available to reduce the GHG emissions from that particular sector. And so we will be looking at other sectors as well in due course. But thank you for raising that important point. And finally, over to James. But also, I just wanted to mention to James that we're running out of time. So to try and make the best use of 3 to 4 minutes probably. Over to you, James.
Unmuted. Yeah. Thank you, Dinesh. So perhaps I will only quickly supplement my colleagues and then take the one question from Robert on conservation agriculture. So with Suresh, I think he could also have highlighted some of the common mistakes in terms of the investment terrain in East Africa. So for example, sometimes you do find that there are grain dryers in regions where grain is not, they're not classified as grain baskets as such. So it would be nice to see more of these drying facilities being installed in grain baskets rather than in non-grain baskets. Other examples is you find sometimes with the development of the inland fisheries and aquaculture, you do find fish processing plants in places where fish is not produced. So I think must be done working with the private sector to really target investments in places where it is very clear that production is going to meet the processing capability. To supplement also my colleague Sonia on climate smart agriculture, I just wanted to say that the context in East Africa in terms of building resilience and to respond to Blaine Tyler of the Greenpeace Africa movement is to say that we see not just non-climate related risks as being very important components of developing climate smart agriculture for smallholder agriculture. In the sense that a lot of the knowledge and the technologies that exist within smallholder agriculture today is based on indigenous knowledge and is based on technical understanding of local production methods and local conditions. And so those really need to be built into that model in terms of creating a baseline to understand if we are making improvements, where are we coming from. And on that basis, you know, there are other issues that have to do with access to land. There are issues of equity, how women get access to opportunities and youth get access to opportunities in relation to the more traditional agricultural players. So I think that whole area comes into the mix in terms of providing access and opportunity for developing climate smart agriculture. And so not so much the definition, but really how do things function and how do you operationalize a climate smart agriculture program. Lastly, in response to Robert, yes, it is true. The conservation agriculture movement is not as big in East Africa as it is in Southern Africa, but it is very steady and it is growing. I hear you with your work in Uganda, in northern Uganda, in the drylands of northern Uganda, trying to bring this technology to farmers to increase productivity there. I know that a number of other colleagues and partners, including FAO, are also working on that. But I wanted to say from the CGIAR, we have a center that is very active on testing climate agriculture and conservation agriculture and scaling up that particular technology even in areas of northern Tanzania. And that center is CIMIT, the International Center for Research on Maize and Wheat. If you get in touch with us, we will be happy to link you to the group that works, the research group that is working there, Claire Sterling and others, and we would be happy for you to share, data with them and to chart a way forward. So thank you very much. Back to you, Dinesh.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much for those interventions. They were very valuable, and we're over time by 1 minute, so I would just stop here and just use this opportunity to thank the speakers for their time, and also to all the attendees who have joined us from all over the world. Thank you so much for the time and participation. I do realize that we've not been able to answer all your questions, but I would encourage you to get in touch with us if you have any pressing questions or if you need to know more about how to access our information, resources and tools and so on. But that's it from us now. Thank you so much for attending, and I hope you would get back to us on